For those of you who've been following us, you've been watching the videos, and last episode found us aground in the middle of a seaway. For me, this grounding was not like a typical grounding on the ICW where you're in a narrow channel and the water is shallow. The sand kind of shifts and so you go aground. This grounding was not like that for me because it was in the open water and had the potential to really cause some serious damage. The waves were hitting us on the beam and the boat was tilting with the waves, and I was concerned that it was pushing us towards the shoal area, which was about a foot. If that would have happened, the boat would have totally turned on its side and filled with water. I do consider this a mistake, a major mistake. However, I'm thankful that no one was hurt. As far as the boat, we're waiting to find out if there's damage on the keel. This grounding really has gotten me thinking about some serious limitations that I have, not only in my experience, but also in the way our boat is rigged. I'll explain all that and how that contributed to this grounding in this episode, so stay tuned. In this episode, I'm going to talk about what are the factors that led to this very difficult situation and ways that you who are sailors, especially beginning sailors, can avoid some of the mistakes. Here are some of the lessons that I've learned and some of my concerns about moving forward. Lesson number 1. Cruising is different than day sailing. How? Day sailing is when you have a sailboat and you go out, you're in the same waters, maybe you travel 15, 20 miles or 30 miles in the same waters, the same bay or coastal area. For instance, you have one slip, that's your slip at the marina that you have, and it's the same slip, so you can kind of get used to after 3 or 4 times, leaving and coming, leaving and coming, coming and leaving. It's the same slip, same marina, and you get familiar with it, and you know the waters, you know the depths, you know the local information, and you don't really have difficulties with navigation because it's like your backyard. In other words, the learning curve is a lot easier because it's the same thing. And after a season or two, you really become an expert because the conditions aren't really changing. Same marina, same slip, same local waters. That's great. That's a day cruiser. And those are folks that really focus on the fun of sailing. So day sailing and cruising are different. Cruising is entirely different when you're moving, because you're in areas that you're not familiar with. You are cruising, traveling across geographic distances, and the navigation issues are completely different than what a day sailor faces. Yes, there are similarities because boating is boating. That's true. But if you're a day sailor, you may not really be aware of some of the different dynamics and skills that are required in cruising. But if you've ever gotten in your sailboat that you own and cruise across regions, 500 miles, and overnights, weeks after weeks, then you'll know what I'm talking about. That's cruising. It's different, isn't it? Main difference, day sailors sail in conditions that they're familiar with. Cruisers are facing new circumstances. I would love to hear some comments from those of you who are cruisers, who own your own sailboat and you've been cruising across geographic areas. I would love to have you please comment on what are some of the differences that you found that separate a day sailor from the skills of a cruiser. Lesson number 2. It's better and safer to sail away from land, really almost as far as possible, than it is to be closer to land. Why? Because being closer to land can give you a false sense of security, but it can also keep you closer to the land, which is your enemy should there be a storm come up, or maybe you lose steering, or some other difficulty or problem occurs. Now, when I was kind of being trained, informal training with a good friend of mine, coming down the Chesapeake Bay, we went out right in the middle of the bay and crossed the bay, and we were headed south, and I didn't really understand why we had to completely go out so far out of sight of land. And he said to me something very wise, and it's very true, that I have found out, and which I think did contribute to this grounding. And he said this: it's a false sense of security to think that you're going to be safer if you're closer to land. So it's not that I was cutting corners and not following the aids to navigation, far from it. But I did not need to be as close to that shoal as I was. That was basically a major mistake. Another lesson is that it's very important that you are comfortable with the way your boat is rigged. If your boat is not rigged in a manner that's easy to sail and that you're familiar and feel confident in the sails and the rigging, then you're going to get into difficulties because you're going to compensate for your lack of confidence in the boat itself, which is going to cause you to maybe make some decisions that are not very wise. So now that I found myself aground, the question is, what did I do about it? Well, the first thing is we tried to get unstuck, and we did that by engaging the throttle in reverse and going in forward and trying to get a sense of where the deeper water was and hoping that we would maybe get lifted by the waves and trying to position the bow, but we were pretty hard aground. The next thing I was concerned about was how the waves were hitting us on the beam to our port on the landward side. The shoal really gets shallow. I mean, it goes down to 1 foot. And so right now we're in 4 feet of water, and the waves were pushing us deeper into the shoal, okay? And I didn't want to move any more into the shoal, so I did drop the anchor so we could stay in that 4-foot depth. The next thing that we did was get on the phone and call Boat US. All right, so we didn't call the Coast Guard. We didn't need to call the Coast Guard. We called Boat US, and they said they'd be there in an hour. Now, the next thing I was concerned about was pop-up thunderstorms, lightning storms coming up, because that really would have been extremely stressful to be kind of stuck out there. And thankfully, it was one of the most beautiful days we had had in a while. In fact, that's why we got out at first light to make progress, because the weather was really good that day. So we were very fortunate in that, because we were basically helpless out there for an hour. Okay, so this is red 4. Now red 4 marks the end of the shoal line, and we stayed clear of it. Now I know on these maps, when they're out at a distance it looks a lot closer, but if it zoomed in to scale, you'd see that we cleared it, we stayed away from it. Now, the waves were coming on the beam, and one of the difficulties that I've had is that my baby stay needs to be repaired. That's why we were headed north, okay? And as a result, I don't raise the mainsail because in waves 2 or 3 feet high, and these waves actually built higher than that, it puts a lot of pressure on the mast, and it's not a keel step mast, it's a deck step mast, and the baby stay is partly what holds up the mast. So without that mainsail raised, there's no buffer to getting hit from waves on the beam, and the boat really gets rolling. In fact, we were rolling over 30 degrees, not voluntarily. It's one thing to heel 30 degrees because you want to, because you're sailing. We were heeling 30 degrees involuntarily, going back and forth. That's how strong the waves hitting us on the beam. Now, if we were able to raise the mainsail, we would have been able to control that boat better. So this also happened to us when we were crossing the Albemarle Sound. So what I did is I just basically tacked back and forth so the waves would be hitting us better degrees than on the beam, and that's how we were able to, proceed in this one area where the waves were strong on the beam. And it was when we were tacking back and forth when we hit the shoal, really in seconds. We have an alarm on our depth sounder that starts to beep when you get to 7-foot depth. There was no time for this alarm to even go off, so we just hit. We were going about 6 knots, so we were really hard aground. We were told by an experienced local pilot, local captain, that area, the maps can't keep up. Now, once the captain came from Boat US, he was very concerned because he did not want to wind up going aground as well, and he told us so, and he wanted me to bring the anchor up. Now, here's the problem. The next problem is that anchor chain itself is very difficult for me to pull up. I mean, I went to the front and tried to pull that anchor up, and because the way the boat was all twisted around, it was basically very, very difficult. Also, the bow roller, which is the anchor roller, is not fitted to the existing tackle that we have. It's from the original make, and the roller furler cotter pin is right in the same area that the bow roller, that the chain goes through. The bow roller is not wide enough, and the whole system is not good, and it often jumps the bow roller, and the chain begins to pressure against the roller furler. So our ground tackle needs to be changed. I want a windlass, and we need a new bow roller, a wider area that actually fits the chain, fits the rock to anchor that I have on there. So that was part of the problem. It was very stressful, and I've tried winching it in the past, winching the chain, and it's, the forces are very powerful, and it's actually seems very dangerous because there's a lot of tension, and at one point the hook slipped off the chain. It's very dangerous to be screwing around with a ground tackle system that doesn't work. We need a windlass. We need to get a new bow roller. We need to fix our ground tackle. Well, it was one hell of a day. That's all I can say. I'll tell you. We were finally able to get the anchor up, even though it had jumped the bow roller several times, and then we were pulled off. And I felt when we got in, this is where we're going to stay. Okay, because I'm not taking this boat back out with faulty ground tackle system and a baby stay that doesn't work, and not being able to really operate this boat in any type of challenging conditions. We are in Oriental, North Carolina. Thankfully, it's not a bad place to be stuck. We're in a beautiful marina. We're not going to be able to make it up to the Chesapeake. I'm very disappointed. We have been very grateful to be able to learn a lot of skills in the past year, navigation and docking, very important skills. Sailing is an important skill too. For those of you that say, oh, why are you never sailing? Well, it's not just all about sailing. If you want to be a cruiser, there's lots of other skills that you have to also learn. One of the things about sailing is that I do have 3 sailing certifications, and I'm confident that we will be able to, come up to speed quickly, but I don't like the way this boat is rigged, and the way the boat is rigged has been one of the things that has really vexed me and has kept me from raising the sails. This is a problem that needs to be fixed before we can really venture far out.